Okay, so for today, we're going to be going back to Minmus and setting up a semi-permanent surface base there. So we're going to go ahead and start in the vehicle assembly bay as per usual. And I'm going to go ahead and start construction on the base. And my original destination for this was going to be Lathe, which is one of the moons that orbit Jool. But I'd finished construction on the rocket, and this is a pretty big base, so the whole thing looked pretty weird, and so I ended up just scrapping the whole base, and I decided to go to the much more desirable location of Minmus. So I chose that first because it's close, and second, even though it's further away from Kerbin, it actually requires less delta V to get to. And that's because while it is further away than the Mun, it's actually a lot smaller, so it requires less delta V to orbit and get captured around and then land. So, that said, I've begun construction on the base. It's got a capacity of 38 Kerbals, and even though it's just going to be sitting on the surface for most of its life, I've gone ahead and put on 4 vector engines, and these are pretty overpowered for transport in deep space, but I went with them because they have a pretty big gimbal range, and they're very powerful, which will allow me to have really fine control over the ship whenever we're trying to land it. And you can also see I put those stabilizers on the bottom, and they're not actually going to touch the ground. They're just going to be slightly above it, so that whenever we land, it'll rest on the bottom of that little fuel tank, and the stabilizers will just keep it from tipping over when we touch the ground. You can see I've just added, I'm adding some struts right now, which do increase the weight a little bit, but I just want to make sure this thing is really stable. And I've added communication antenna to talk back to Kerbin. I've now begun construction on the fairing, which, since this is such a big ship, it's going to need an equally large fairing, and so I went with the 5 meter Saturn V parts from the Making History DLC. And actually you can see here I'm going to add a hitchhiker storage module, which is just supposed to contain food and water and other things that the Kerbals would need to survive on a prolonged mission to another celestial body. That said, there's the fairing, and I'm going to go ahead and begin construction on the transport stage. And I had to launch this a couple times because I kept underestimating how much fuel I'd need, but what I ended up doing was grabbing the medium fuel tank for the 5 meter diameter parts and putting an engine plate on it and using the Rhino engine. And so that engine is just going to get us from, it's going to finish our circularization around Kerbin during our ascent and get us to Minmus, and then slowed down, and then we will do the final landing burns on the 4 vector engines on the base. This is going to be a pretty big rocket too, given the size of the payload, so we're going to be using 2 Clydesdale solid rocket boosters along with 9 Mammoth engines, which are the biggest, not the biggest, but the most powerful engines in the game. And so I'll go ahead and attach those Separatrons to the sides of the boosters to make sure that they are launched away safely from the craft whenever they're detached, and I will rearrange my staging. And for some reason, I noticed that the engine plates that I attach the engine to, for some reason, they can act as a decoupler in, I'm not really sure why you'd want to separate only the engine, but I just disabled staging on that and put a decoupler, but we're going to go ahead and get ready for launch. And we have liftoff. So you can see, this is the first video. I finally got some new graphics mods to work, and this is the first video that I'll be using them in. I've tried to get these mods to work. Basically, it just makes everything look better. You can see Kerbin finally has clouds, and we're going to be flying through them here in a second. But I've tried to install them a couple times, and it hasn't worked, so I made another attempt today, and it just worked for some reason. I don't know what I did differently. But either way, you can see Kerbin looks a lot better from orbit, and some of the other planets will too. There is some, I guess it's mist on the Minmus surface, so it looks pretty cool that you'll see once we get there. But we've had our flame out and separation on the second stage, and we are finishing that burn with the Rhino engine. And we're going to go ahead and get ready to make our way to Minmus. So we're going to go ahead and do our prograde burn to finish our circularization. And I don't know what was going on with the maneuver node maker today, but for some reason, this is like my 5th recording of the launch, even though this is a comparatively really simple mission. But what I would do is I'd make the maneuver node on my orbit there, and I'd drag out the prograde marker, and it just wouldn't give me a intercept with Minmus. And I don't know why, because I literally had the planned burn going straight through the planet, and it still said I didn't have an encounter. But anyways, this was the attempt that it just decided to work for some reason, so I hope that's either fixed or I just don't have that issue again. But we're going to go ahead and do a 25 meter per second mid-course correction burn to get our periapsis where we want it above the Minmus surface, and I overburned a little bit there, so we'll just turn around the opposite direction and start to do some more fine burns with the engine at 2% thrust until we get our Minmus periapsis of about 50,000 meters. And there's a bunch of places on Minmus that you can land, and definitely some more desirable than others, so I'm going to go with the Minmus flats for this one, which is a little boring, but I was planning originally on landing somewhere on top of a mountain, but this having been like my 5th or 6th recording because the game kept glitching, I just wanted to do something quick and simple. So here we are circularized around Minmus, and I'm going to go ahead and use a maneuver node to start planning out my landing spot. And so we're just going to warp around the moon and burn retrograde and slightly normal so that we are going to be landing on the Minmus flats there. And I think, honestly, I probably would have had to end up going for somewhere like the Minmus flats anyways, regardless of whether I had those glitches or not, because, like I said earlier, this base is going to be technically resting on a fuel tank and not those stabilizers on the side. And that means that, unlike our normal landers that have landing gear with suspension, this one doesn't. So we're going to have to be very careful with killing off basically all of our horizontal velocity before then pointing radial out and beginning our landing. And speaking of, you can see we get plenty of use of those stabilizers there, and we almost fall over, but we are good to go. So I just disable gimbal on those vector engines, and we can see this is the inside of the Hitchhiker storage module. And we will have, as is customary, have one of our Kerbals hop out, plant our little flag, and jetpack back in. So that's this mission done. I'm not really sure what I'm going to be doing for next week's mission. Possibly a return mission from Lathe, because I definitely want to go there. But yeah, that's about it. See ya.